This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could have a better future. I thought when I grew old, he would remember me with love and respect. But on Father's Day, a package arrived at my door. No card, no note, just a box with my name written in his handwriting. My wife told me not to open it, but something inside me couldn't stop. My hands shook as I peeled back the tape, and what I found inside changed everything. But before I tell you what was in that box, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. The house smelled of dust and weak coffee. The old clock on the wall ticked slow, like it was tired too. I sat at the kitchen table, same chair as every morning, staring at the wood grain like it might change. The world outside was still. No cars, no birds, no voices. Just me and the quiet. The air felt too clean, too dry. My wife moved slow in the kitchen, not saying much. The kind of silence that fills the room and presses on the chest. Then came the sound, the low thud from the porch. Not loud, not soft, just enough to make us both look up. I thought maybe the wind had knocked something down. I stood, joints stiff, and walked to the front door. There it was, a brown box sitting on the step. Medium size, plain, no decoration, no bow, no mark of kindness. Just cardboard and tape. My name written on top in black ink, bold, hard, like someone pressed too long with the pen. The handwriting was familiar but strained. It looked like my son's. I stared at it for a while, not moving. The morning sun hit the porch light just right, making the box look darker around the edges. My hands shook a little as I bent down to pick it up. It was lighter than I expected. I tilted it once, but there was no sound inside, no shift, no slide, no roll. Just stillness. I looked again at the handwriting. It was definitely my son's, uneven, jagged, written like someone angry. My wife came to the door behind me and stopped. She didn't say anything yet, but I could feel her eyes on it, on me. I carried it in, slow, careful, like it might fall apart. I set it on the kitchen table, right in the center. The table suddenly looked smaller with it sitting there. The coffee smell mixed with the faint scent of cardboard and something else. Maybe dust, maybe old air from wherever it came. There was no card, no message, just my name. I turned it over, looking for a label or a note, but there was none. No return address, no postal mark, nothing to say where it came from. It was like it appeared out of nowhere. I stood there, staring. My wife stood near the sink, drying her hands even though they were already dry. Neither of us spoke. I thought about all the Father's Days before, the ones with ties, shirts, and burnt pancakes. Then the ones after, with silence, no calls, no visits, just another day. But now there was this box. I didn't know what to make of it. My heart felt strange, not happy, not scared, just full. Too full. Like something was coming, but I didn't know what. I looked at my wife again, wanting her to say something first, but she didn't. The morning light hit the box through the window, and it almost glowed against the dull wood. I felt a pull, the kind that says, open it, see what's inside. But another part of me said, wait. I didn't know which part was right. The box sat there between us like a memory made solid, something that had weight even if it didn't. I sat back down in my chair, looking at it like it might start talking. The air in the room was thick. I rubbed my hands together, dry palms scraping. The old clock ticked again. The coffee went cold. The quiet returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watching me now. The box was still there. My son's name wasn't on it, only mine. That somehow made it worse. Like a message meant only for me. I didn't touch it again. I just sat there, eyes fixed, feeling the hours stretch. Outside, the day kept moving. Inside, time stopped. The box waited, patient, like it knew it didn't need to rush. Like it knew I would break first. My wife froze when she saw it. Her hands stopped mid-air, the dish towel falling without sound onto the floor. She looked at the box like it was alive. Her breath caught, short and sharp. The quiet around her turned colder. She said the words slow, almost like she didn't want to hear them herself. "Don't open it." I wanted to laugh. It sounded like fear, and fear never belonged in this house. Not on Father's Day, not between us. I looked at her, waiting for her to smile, to tell me she was joking. She didn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on the brown cardboard. I smiled anyway, the small, tired smile of a man who still wants to believe everything is normal. But the smile didn't reach my eyes. She stepped back, one slow step at a time, until she was standing near the counter, away from it. I noticed her hands trembling slightly, not enough to show weakness, but enough to show truth. The air between us felt stretched thin. I wanted to say something, a joke, maybe, something to make the moment smaller. But the words wouldn't come. I looked again at the box. The tape across the top was uneven, layers upon layers, like someone had sealed it too many times. My name was still there in thick black ink, the letters hard and angry. My wife whispered again, softer now. "Call someone." I frowned at that. Who would I call? It was just a box. From our son. The same son we hadn't seen in years. The same son who'd vanished with our trust and our peace. I wanted to believe it was something harmless. Maybe a card, maybe a letter, maybe even a small gift trying to say sorry without saying the word. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. The ink wasn't clean. The strokes were heavy, like my son had written through tears or rage. My chest grew tight. I leaned in a little closer. There was no return address, no number, no city, nothing. Just our home written clear, like the sender knew it by heart. I swallowed hard. My wife reached out, touched my arm gently, and then pulled back as if the contact itself burned. I could see the memory flicker in her eyes, the last time we had seen him, the shouting, the slammed door, the words that could never be taken back. I blinked it away, but it stayed, living in the corners of my mind like dust that never leaves. I turned the box again, slower now, careful, studying every corner. I noticed small dents, fingerprints maybe, faint smudges near the tape. Nothing dangerous, not really, but strange enough to make my stomach twist. I set it down again. My wife whispered, "Please don't touch it." I wanted to tell her she was overreacting. I wanted to tell her everything was fine. But my voice didn't move. It stayed stuck somewhere deep in my throat. I looked out the window. The sky was pale. The street was empty. The world looked too calm, too unaware of what sat on our table. I felt something cold move through me, like a thought I couldn't shake. I imagined my son's hands taping the box shut. Imagined the eyes that had once looked up at me with trust, now filled with something darker. I pushed the image away, but it clung like smoke. My wife picked up the phone, then set it down again. Her fingers hovered above it, uncertain. The sound of the clock filled the silence again. Tick, 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 loud and slow. I could hear my own heartbeat under it. I rubbed my palms against my knees. The box didn't move, didn't change, but somehow it felt closer, like it was listening. I thought of what my wife had said. Call someone. I thought about how her voice had broken a little when she said it. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe there were things a man shouldn't try to face alone, even if that thing was wrapped in brown paper and tape. I didn't know what scared me more, what might be inside or what might not. I looked at her one last time, her eyes wide and wet, and said nothing. The silence said enough. I hadn't spoken to my son in years. The silence began like a crack, small and quiet, then spread until it split our family apart. It had been years since his voice filled the house. Years since laughter from the back room. Years since footsteps down the hall. Now it was just two old people and the echo of what used to be a family. I remembered the first time things went wrong. Small things, missing money, broken trust, excuses that sounded too easy. Then came the bigger things. The lies, the fights, the shouting that turned into something worse. My son was bright once, full of plans. He built engines in the garage, fixed radios, talked about the future like it was already his. But something changed. Something got lost. Maybe it was the friends he made. Maybe it was the things he started to take. Maybe it was what the world gave him that he couldn't handle. No one ever knew where it started, only where it ended. The court dates came first, long days in cold rooms. I sat there, watching my boy sit in front of strangers who spoke like they knew him better. My wife cried through every word. I didn't. I couldn't. I had to be the one to stand still, the one to hold the line. I told myself it was for my son's good. That punishment meant learning. But years later, I would wonder if it only taught him distance. Then came the rehab visits. The letters that stopped coming. The promises that fell apart the next week. Hope became a habit that hurt more than it helped. I kept every note, every apology, every scrap of handwriting that said, "I'll do better." But they were all the same handwriting, the same loop, the same end. Until even the lies stopped, and there was just nothing. The night he stole from my shop was the last night. Tools, old coins, things that weren't worth much but meant something. I remembered the noise, glass breaking, the sound of running feet, the soft hum of the streetlight outside. I remembered stepping out to see the open door, the cash box empty, the world quiet again. I didn't call the police that night. I just waited. But no one came back. When the sun rose, I told my wife it was over. "He made his choice," I had said. She didn't answer then either. She just looked at me, eyes wide, full of something that wasn't anger, wasn't grief, something worse. Maybe disappointment, maybe blame. I hadn't known which. The last words we shared weren't meant to be last. They were shouted, angry, filled with everything we didn't mean and everything we couldn't stop ourselves from saying. I can still hear them sometimes, sharp and clear, like echoes that never faded. "You're not my son. You're dead to me." I had said those words, and I had meant them then. But years make words heavier. I carried them like stones in my chest, day after day, year after year. Sometimes I'd pick up the phone, almost dial, then put it back down. The pride always won. The hurt always spoke louder. My wife never stopped hoping. Every birthday she baked a small cake. Every Christmas she left an empty chair at the table. But nothing changed. No calls, no visits, no letters. Until today. Until this box. A plain brown box that felt like all the years between us had been sealed inside. I thought maybe this was it. The bridge back. Or maybe the last word from a son who had nothing else to say. I wanted to believe it was forgiveness. I wanted to believe my son had found peace. But something in my gut said no. Something in the way my wife's hands shook said this was not peace, not yet. The years had taught us what fear looked like, and it sometimes came in the shape of love. I looked at the box again, my heart heavy with memories. Every mistake I'd made lived inside that cardboard now. Every word I wished I hadn't said was wrapped in that tape. I didn't know if I was ready to open it. Maybe some things should stay sealed forever. The box sat on the table like a wound. It didn't belong there, but it owned the room. Every sound in the house seemed to fade around it. The hum of the refrigerator softened. The clock's tick slowed. Even the light from the window looked weaker, like it didn't want to touch it. The box waited. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but it felt alive. I sat there, staring, elbows on the table, hands folded like in prayer, but without faith. My wife stood by the counter, eyes never leaving it. She kept wiping her hands on the same towel, though they were already clean. The air was thick, heavy, and still. The kind of silence that builds before something happens. The kind that listens. I leaned closer, my breath shallow. The tape across the top was perfect, too perfect. The edges straight, the layers smooth, not rushed. Whoever sealed it took their time. That bothered me more than if it had been sloppy. Care meant intent. Intent meant purpose. I reached out once, then stopped halfway. My fingers hovered above it. I thought I heard something, a faint sound, maybe from inside, maybe from my own head. I tilted my ear closer, but there was nothing. No rattle, no shift, no slide. It was silent. I lifted it an inch off the table. No weight change, no movement inside. It was light but dense, like it was filled with air that didn't belong. I set it down again. My wife flinched at the soft thud. She whispered, "Don't." Her voice cracked. She didn't have to finish the rest. I understood. She didn't want me near it. She didn't trust it. Maybe she didn't trust our son. Maybe she didn't trust the years that had passed between us. I didn't answer. I just looked at the box again, studying every line, every fold, every shadow. It reminded me of the night we got our last call from the rehab center. The voice on the phone had said, "He left." Just that. No goodbye, no reason, just gone. This felt the same. Empty, but loud. I pressed my palm flat against the table, steadying myself. The wood was cool. The box was not. It seemed to hold warmth, like it had been touched too long by hands that meant something. My wife turned away, her shoulders shaking. I knew she was crying, but she didn't make a sound. I didn't go to her. I couldn't. My feet felt rooted. The box was pulling at me, the way memories do when they're not done with you. I tried to think of anything else. The yard that needed mowing, the sound of rain last week, the neighbor's dog barking. But everything came back to the same thought. What's inside? I wanted to open it, not because I wasn't afraid, but because not knowing was worse. The unknown had always been harder to bear than the truth, even when the truth hurt. But my wife's voice echoed in my head. "You know what he's capable of." I hated that sentence. I hated that it was true. I hated that she had to say it. I looked at her reflection in the window. She looked smaller now, thinner, her hands gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing holding her up. I thought about how much she'd already lost. Maybe she couldn't lose more. Maybe I shouldn't risk it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't remember the last time I'd been afraid like this. Not of danger, but of what it might mean. The box was more than a thing. It was a message, a presence, a ghost. It was the silence before something breaks. I sat back down, my knees weak. The chair creaked under me. My breath came slow. My eyes burned. The tape on the box glimmered slightly under the weak sunlight. I thought of my son as a boy again, running across the yard, shoes muddy, laughing. The same hands that once built toy cars might have sealed this box. The same boy who once made paper gifts on Father's Day might have sent this. The same boy who once hugged me too tight was now a stranger behind layers of tape. The air was too still. The box waited. I waited. My wife stood motionless. The silence filled every corner of the house, pressing down on us both. It wasn't peace. It was warning. I wanted to believe it was something good, something small and soft, something that could make up for the years we had lost. Maybe a letter, maybe an apology, maybe a picture from better days. I told myself that. I tried to let the thought settle in my chest like a bit of warmth, but it didn't stay. It slipped away like sand. The edges of the box told a different story. The tape wasn't clean. It was smeared with something dark, something that had dried unevenly. I looked closer. Maybe it was dirt. Maybe it was oil. But a part of me knew better. My hand hovered above it, then pulled back quick, as if the cardboard might burn. My heart began to beat faster, steady but hard, each thump heavy like footsteps in an empty hall. My wife was still by the window, eyes fixed on nothing. She hadn't moved in a long time. I thought about asking her to look, to tell me I was seeing things, but I didn't want to hear what she'd say. I already knew. The handwriting on the box looked worse now, the letters uneven, shaky. My name stretched across the top, but the letters bent too much, like the writer had lost control halfway through. It didn't look like the careful script of the son I used to know. It looked like something written in a hurry, under strain. It didn't look sane. The more I looked, the less it felt like a gift. The air around the box grew thick. I couldn't stop looking at it, like it had eyes of its own. I thought about the last message my son ever sent. A short one. No greeting, no name, just a single line. "You'll understand someday." I'd deleted it. I shouldn't have. Maybe this box was the someday I rubbed my forehead, the skin warm and damp. My breath grew shallow. I wanted to lift it again, to feel if it was still light. but my hands wouldn't move. The fear was small but deep, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers in the back of the head, slow and steady. Something isn't right. I tried to shake it off. I tried to tell myself I was just tired. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Maybe guilt had changed the way things looked. But the thought stayed. My wife finally spoke. Her voice was soft but flat. "You think he's trying to say sorry?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wanted to believe my son was still capable of something good. But the years had taken that hope and replaced it with something harder. The world had changed my boy. Drugs, anger, hate, they had reshaped him. I used to think love could fix anything. But love had limits. I learned that too late. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks. The same cracks that ran through our family now ran through the plaster above us. I whispered to myself, "It's just a box." But it wasn't. It never was. The silence between my wife and me filled the room like smoke, thin and suffocating. I could hear her breathing slow and uneven. I could hear the faint creak of the house. Every small sound felt bigger, sharper. I felt like something unseen was watching. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was my son's ghost, not dead but living in memory, in shame, in the years of absence. I thought about all the times I'd looked out the window, half expecting to see a car pull in, a knock at the door, a chance to start over. Now the knock had come, but it brought a box instead of a voice. My chest hurt. My hands shook again. I wished it was heavier, wished it made sense, wished it rattled or shifted. Anything to tell me what it was. But it stayed still. I wondered if it was empty, and if that would somehow be worse. I thought maybe the dark smudges on the tape weren't dirt at all. Maybe they were fingerprints. Maybe they were something else. I pushed the thought away, but it kept coming back, quiet and slow. The doubt was now louder than reason. It filled every corner of me. I didn't know if I wanted to know the truth anymore. I just knew that whatever was inside that box wasn't going to fix anything. I picked up the phone with a hand that didn't feel like my own. The weight of it was small, but the meaning was heavy. My thumb hovered over the buttons. I had never thought I would call the police about my own son. The words felt wrong before they even left my mouth. But the silence in the room told me there was no other choice. My wife stood behind me, still and waiting. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her fear said everything. I dialed slowly, each number pressing down like a stone on my heart. When the line clicked and a voice came through, calm and steady, I almost hung up. But I didn't. I cleared my throat and said the words flat, careful, without emotion. "My son sent me a package. My wife doesn't want me to open it." The operator paused. Just a second of quiet, but it was enough to make the world stop. Then came the voice, still calm, but tighter now. "Sir, stay where you are. We're sending someone over." I didn't argue. I just said, "Okay." The phone felt heavier now. I set it down on the table beside the box. The click of plastic on wood was louder than it should have been. My wife turned her face away, her shoulders shaking. I didn't go to her. I didn't move. I just sat there, eyes fixed on the box, waiting for the sound of sirens. My heart beat slow but deep, each thump echoing in my ears. The air grew colder. I could hear the wind outside, faint and steady, moving through the trees. Every second felt stretched too long. I thought about what I had just done. Called strangers to come into my home, to look at something sent by my own blood. I tried to tell myself it was the right thing, that it was about safety. But inside, it felt like betrayal. I had promised myself, long ago, that no matter what my son did, he would always be my son. But now, with one phone call, that promise broke for good. I felt the weight of it pressing down on my chest. My wife whispered my name, but it barely reached me. I stared at the box like it might answer for everything that went wrong. The world outside was still. Then, in the distance, the faint sound began. Low, rising, steady. Sirens. They grew closer, louder, clearer. The sound carried through the walls, filling the house, shaking the air. My stomach turned. It was real now. The police were coming. I stood, slow, my legs weak. I walked to the window and saw the flash of red and blue down the road. The colors moved across the walls like ghosts of fire and water. My wife covered her mouth. The siren stopped in front of the house. The silence after was worse. Doors opened. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Voices outside, low and quick. Then a knock. 3 times. Firm, polite, certain. I didn't answer at first. I looked at my wife, then at the box, then back at the door. Finally, I walked to it, hand trembling as I turned the handle. The officers stood there, calm, professional, eyes sharp but kind. One of them nodded. "We got your call, sir." I just stepped aside, letting them in. My throat was dry. My mind was empty. The sound of their radios filled the space, clicking, murmuring. They saw the box on the table immediately. One of them asked, "No one's touched it?" I shook my head. The officer nodded again, then spoke into his radio. My wife stayed in the corner, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. I sat down again, feeling smaller than I ever had in my own home. The officers moved with quiet care, their boots soft on the floorboards, their gloves snapping faintly. I couldn't stop staring. My hands were numb. The box looked smaller now, but somehow heavier. The house smelled of cardboard and fear. The sirens were gone, but the sound still lived in my ears. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, eyes never leaving the box. The waiting was worse than anything else. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where something had ended, and I didn't even know what that something was yet. 2 officers stepped inside, the sound of their boots careful on the old floor. They looked around, quiet, calm, trained to see what others didn't. I sat still, hands folded tight, eyes on the box. The taller officer gave a small nod to his partner. "Let's take a look." The words were gentle, but they cut through the air like a blade. My wife stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, as if to hold something broken inside. I wanted to say something, maybe to tell them it was probably nothing, maybe to take the blame for worrying too much. But no words came. The house was too still. One officer put on gloves, slow and deliberate. The snap of latex echoed too loud in the silence. The other reached for his radio, speaking low, almost in a whisper, calling it in. The sound of static hummed for a second, then faded. I watched every move, my breath steady but shallow. The box sat in the center of the table like it had been waiting all this time for this exact moment. One officer bent down beside it. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the handwriting. He tilted his head slightly, studying it. "This from your son?" he asked quietly. I only nodded once. I didn't trust my own voice anymore. The officer looked at me for a second longer, then turned back to his partner. They moved with patience, but there was tension in their shoulders, a kind that only came with experience. They had seen things like this before. The second officer placed a small flashlight on the table and shone it across the box, checking for holes, wires, seams. Nothing. He pressed his ear near it for a second, listening. "No ticking," he muttered. The first one leaned closer too, sniffing slightly, cautious. "No smell." They looked at each other, then nodded. I could feel my wife shaking even from across the room. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her hand, to tell her it was going to be fine, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was watching someone else's life from outside the window. One of the officers gently lifted the box. His gloved hands moved under it like he was handling something fragile. The cardboard gave a faint creak under the pressure. It didn't weigh much. "Light," the officer said. The other nodded. They both carried it outside. I followed them to the door, my heart thudding in my chest. The front yard was bright with sunlight, the kind that should have felt warm, but didn't. The air smelled of grass and distant rain. The box looked smaller out there, sitting on the lawn. The officers knelt beside it, their movements careful, measured. One held the box steady, while the other took out a small knife from his belt. The sound of the blade sliding out was soft but sharp. My breath caught. My wife stood at the doorway, her hand over her mouth. The officer pressed the knife against the tape. The first cut was slow. The sound was soft but final. The cardboard peeled back. A layer of dust lifted into the air. The officer stopped for a second, looking inside but not touching. He exhaled quietly, relief in the sound. "It's fine," he said to his partner. My knees weakened, but I didn't move closer yet. I wanted to, but fear held me still. The second officer reached in and pulled out what was inside. Light, flat, wrapped in old paper. He unwrapped it carefully. A frame. A photo. The sunlight caught the cracked glass. It glinted once, then dulled. My chest tightened. I knew that picture before I even saw it clearly. It was us. Me, my wife, and my son. A long time ago. My throat went dry. The photo was worn, faded at the corners, the kind you keep too long in a drawer. The glass was broken clean through the center, right between me and my son. The officer held it for a moment, then turned it around. Taped to the back was a small piece of paper, folded once. The officer looked at me, then asked, "Do you want to read it?" I nodded, barely. The paper was peeled off gently. It was written in the same black ink as the box. The words were uneven, pressed too hard. The officer handed it to me. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Inside, just one sentence. Short, simple. My son's voice on paper. "You opened everything else. Why not this?" I stared at the note in my hands, the words trembling in front of me even though my fingers were still. The world around me faded. The voices, the wind, the sound of the radio from the police car. Everything went silent. It was as if the air itself stopped breathing. I read the words again, slow this time, tracing each letter like it could change meaning if I looked long enough. "You opened everything else. Why not this?" The sentence hit like a memory, not a message. My throat felt dry. The paper crinkled slightly in my hands, and the sound broke something open inside me. The photo still lay on the grass, the glass cracked, catching bits of sunlight. I saw myself in it, younger, stronger, smiling without the weight of years. My son stood beside me, small hand gripping my shoulder. My wife had her arm around us both. A moment of life frozen before everything fell apart. I knelt down slowly, my old joints stiff and aching, and picked up the frame. The glass edge cut my thumb, a thin line of red blooming against the skin, but I didn't feel it. The pain was too small compared to the one inside. I brushed away the dust with my sleeve. My son's face in the picture looked happy, not perfect, but real. I remembered that day. The smell of barbecue, the sound of the radio, the way my boy had laughed when the dog stole food from the table. That was before the anger, before the shouting, before the words that built walls instead of bridges. The photo was a ghost of a day that once meant something, and now it sat broken, returned like an accusation. I could feel the eyes of the officers on me, quiet and watchful. One of them said softly, "It's safe, sir." Safe. The word didn't fit. Nothing about this was safe. The danger wasn't in the box. It was in the meaning. I looked at the note again. My son's handwriting. The loops uneven, the pressure deep, the pen almost tearing through the paper. The words weren't just angry. They were tired. Tired like someone who had carried too much for too long. "You opened everything else. Why not this?" The line twisted in my head. I thought about all the things I had opened over the years. Letters from court, envelopes from lawyers, forms from hospitals. All the things that explained what my son had done, but never who he had become. I had opened them all, read them, signed them, and then shut the door each time. Maybe that was what my boy meant. Maybe he wasn't talking about the box. Maybe he was talking about himself, the life I refused to open, to understand, to see. The thought hit hard, like a truth that had been waiting years to be spoken. I blinked, but the tears didn't fall yet. I wasn't sure I had any left. My wife finally stepped forward, slow and small, her face pale. She saw the photo in my hands, the blood on my thumb, the note lying open on the ground. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I saw the same thought in her eyes, that this wasn't forgiveness, wasn't peace, wasn't a threat. It was something else. A reminder. A wound reopened on purpose. I felt my heart beating in my throat. I looked up at the officers, both now silent, unsure if they should say more. One of them picked up the empty box and folded it shut, as if to end it. But it wasn't over. The box had done what it was meant to do. It had made me remember. It had made me see. I looked down again at the photo, at my son's face trapped under cracked glass, smiling in a world that no longer existed. I whispered something, but even I couldn't hear it. Maybe it was a name. Maybe it was sorry. The note fluttered in the breeze and landed against my shoe. The ink caught the sunlight for a second before fading dull again. You opened everything else. Why not this? The words sank deeper this time, into the part of me that still wanted to believe I could have done better. My eyes burned. The house behind me felt far away now, the yard too quiet, the day too long. I stood there with the photo in my hands, the note at my feet, and the truth pressing down on my chest. The kind of truth that doesn't break loud, but breaks slow, from the inside out. I felt nothing at first. It was like my body forgot how to react, how to feel, how to breathe. The world around me kept moving, but inside, everything stopped. The colors faded, the sounds blurred, and all that was left was the dull weight in my chest. I stood there with the picture pressed to my stomach, my hands shaking, my fingers stained with a small smear of blood. I stared at the photo until it became just shapes, three people caught in a moment that didn't belong to them anymore. My son's face was young and open, the smile easy, the eyes bright. I couldn't remember the last time I had looked at my son without anger. Every memory I had of him was wrapped in shouting and slammed doors, in fear and shame and guilt that never faded. Now, staring at that smile, I realized how much of it I had forgotten. The small things, the good things, the quiet moments before everything went wrong. The box wasn't a bomb, but it had exploded just the same. Not with fire, but with truth. It had ripped open years of silence, forcing me to see what I had buried. Every word I'd said in anger came back now, heavy and sharp. You're useless. You'll ruin your life. You're not my son. I had said those things and walked away, thinking time would make them fade. But time hadn't erased anything. It had only hardened the lines between us. The box wasn't a threat. It was a message. A wound that my son had mailed back to me. A message that said, I still remember what you did. I thought of how the note said, you opened everything else. Maybe that was the truth of it. I had opened bills, opened reports, opened every explanation for my son's failure except the one that mattered. Myself. I had never opened my heart, never opened my ears. I had shut the door too soon, believing I was protecting what was left of my pride, my family, my name. But in doing so, I had lost the only thing that mattered. I had lost my son. The officers spoke softly somewhere behind me, but I couldn't hear what they said. Their voices were faint, like echoes from another life. My wife stood beside me now, one hand on my arm. Her grip was weak but warm. She didn't cry this time. Her eyes were dry, almost empty. They had run out of tears long ago. I turned the photo around and looked again at the back. The tape marks, the faded paper, the rough edges, all of it told a story. My son had touched this picture. My son had kept it, carried it, maybe for years. Through the chaos, through the loneliness, through every dark night, he had held on to this piece of family. That meant something. It meant that even after everything, some part of him still cared, still remembered, still wanted to be seen. My knees bent slightly as I sank onto the grass. I sat there, old and tired, holding the photo like it was alive. The sunlight hit my face, warm and cruel. I could feel every heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing the words I could no longer say out loud. "I'm sorry." It was too late for the words to matter, but I said them anyway, in my head, over and over. I wondered where my son was now. If he was alive. If he was somewhere watching this unfold. If he had wanted forgiveness, or just wanted me to feel what he had felt, confusion, regret, pain. I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing. This wasn't about hate. This was about memory. My son hadn't forgotten. Neither had I. The years between us had turned into walls, but even walls could crumble when the right thing touched them. This box was that thing. Not a gift, not revenge, but a mirror. A reflection of everything I didn't want to face. I looked at the photo again. The broken glass caught the light in a way that made it look almost whole, like the cracks were trying to form something new. I thought maybe forgiveness didn't come in words. Maybe it came like this, sharp, painful, and late. I held the frame tighter, pressing it to my chest until the edge dug into my skin. I wanted it to hurt. I needed it to. Because pain meant I still cared. Pain meant there was still something left inside me. For the first time in years, I whispered my son's name, and the sound broke the silence like a prayer that had waited too long to be said. The police left. Their cars rolled away slow, the sound of gravel fading into the distance until the road went silent again. The flashing lights disappeared first, then the faint hum of engines, then nothing. Just air. Just stillness. I stood at the doorway, watching the dust settle. The sun was lower now, cutting across the yard in long, thin lines. The box sat open on the table behind me, empty but not harmless. The picture lay beside it, the frame cracked, the glass catching pieces of light. My wife sat in the corner of the room, her face pale and tired, hands folded in her lap. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. The house was too quiet now, too clean of noise. Even the ticking clock sounded far away, like it belonged to another time. I closed the door, the sound soft but heavy, final in a way that made the air shift. I walked back to the table and sat down again. The chair creaked the same way it always did, but even that small sound felt different now. I looked at the photo, at the faces frozen inside it. My own eyes in the picture looked strong once. My wife's eyes looked full of hope. My son's eyes, bright, trusting, unbroken. I traced the outline of the boy's face with a rough finger, slow and careful, afraid that pressing too hard might erase him. I remembered the years after that photo was taken, the long nights, the fights, the words that didn't need to be shouted to cut deep. I had tried to build a wall between myself and pain, but that wall had kept out everything else too. Love, forgiveness, even understanding. Now there was no wall left, just the hollow sound of what it had protected. My wife finally whispered, her voice small, fragile. "He's not done." The words hung in the air, light but sharp. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't know if she meant our son would come back or if she meant something worse. Maybe both. I stared at the empty space beside the box, the space where the photo used to sit before the glass broke. It looked like an absence, a shape carved out of our lives that could never be filled. I leaned back in my chair and let my eyes close. For a moment, I let the silence wrap around me. The sound of my own breathing filled the room. Slow, heavy, real. I thought about the years I had wasted waiting for my son to change, when maybe it had been me who needed to. I thought about the nights my wife cried in bed while I pretended to sleep. I thought about every unopened letter, every ignored call, every chance I had to fix things and didn't. The picture on the table was proof of a life that once made sense. The box beside it was proof that time doesn't erase what we try to forget. I opened my eyes again. The sunlight had shifted, falling across the table in soft stripes. Dust floated through the air, quiet and slow, like small ghosts drifting without direction. I reached out and lifted the photo one more time. The crack in the glass ran right through the space between me and my son. It was a clean break, like a line drawn by fate. I touched it with my thumb, the edge cold against my skin. The blood from earlier had dried in a thin brown streak. It looked almost like part of the picture now. Father, mother, son, and the stain that tied us together. My wife stood up and walked over to me, her hand resting on my shoulder. I didn't look at her. She didn't look at me. We just stood there, the same way we had stood in that picture years ago, close, but divided by something invisible. Outside, a car drove by, slow and distant. The sound faded quick. I took a deep breath, then let it go. The air left my lungs with a quiet sigh, like surrender. I didn't know what would happen next, if my son would come back, if another box would arrive, if there would ever be peace. But I knew one thing: fear had changed shape. It wasn't about the box anymore. It wasn't even about the past. It was about what we had become. I looked at the empty space on the table where the box had been and understood at last. The real danger had never been what my son might send. It had always been what he had already left behind.